Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Danube event on counter-globalization with Professor Xuetong, China's foremost political scientist and the dean of the Tsinghua University's Institute of International Relations. We're very grateful that Professor Xuetong is here on the invitation of the Danube Institute. He will be lecturing today about globalization, counter-globalization, especially in relation to China's foreign policy. And we'll have as respondents, after the lecture, we'll have some comments and questions by Victor Esterhazy of the Public Service University, where he's a researcher. My name is Erik Hendricks. I'm a Dutch sociologist, and I'm very proud that I spent a few years working at Peking University. And Peking University, Beida, is actually a rival of Professor Yen's Tsinghua University. So Peking University used to be the #1 university in China, but then a lot of prestige and money and talent went to Tsinghua. So now Tsinghua is maybe more prestigious. It pains my heart. So this is a very fascinating event. However, we also have a bit of a sad moment right now at the Danube Institute, and many people have been going through a lot the last few days because our research director, David Martin Jones, who many of you know personally and who has organized many events here, passed away yesterday. Yeah, so not everyone here in the audience has even heard about this. Our shock is immense. David is one of my closest friends. I've known him for 8 years. Secretly, I considered myself a bit of a protege, but that's also perhaps ambitious on my side. He was a professor at King's College and the research director here at the Danube Institute. He wrote extensively. He published 11 monographs in historiography and philosophy. His original specialization was 17th century political philosophy, but he wrote about a wide variety of topics. He wrote about the appropriation of Maoist ideology in the 60s in the West, and I think his best book was The Image of China in Western Social and Political Thought. He published this in 2003, and it covers how the Western social and political theorists looked at China through the centuries. And he showed that in the 18th century, Enlightenment thinkers were very positive about China because figures such as Voltaire saw in China a country led by philosopher kings, by Confucian mandarins. But then when the Romantic era hit in the 19th century, and the Qing dynasty was struggling, and the West was industrializing, and the power relations had shifted, and ideology in the West had become more egalitarian, suddenly Western critics started reprimanding China for its authoritarianism and backwardness. And he shows that up until the present, the mood in China, the Western theories about China have followed not just events in China, but events in the Western world as well. So it was a very advanced study. If you email me, I can send you the PDF. It's also available on Library Genesis. I know that he would like as many people as possible to read it. If Professor Jones, if David would be still with us right now, he would probably be moderating this event instead of me. But here we are. It's a very recent event, and we're all still. Many of us are deeply in grief. It came very sudden, and we've lost a great friend. He was Welshman, and he was a Welshman and an Australian, dual nationality, and a very cosmopolitan man. Traveled widely, worked in Singapore, worked in Malaysia at universities, in the UK. He was widely traveled, and he had a very wide horizon, and he had many lives and many different aspects to his character and to his interests. And this is why, now that we've been recalling last few days, and especially today and yesterday, as people in the Institute have sharing their memories of David, we all have different, we all remember things. We all remember very different things about him because he was such a versatile figure. Now, interestingly enough, Professor Jones had something in common with Professor Yen. Not just that that they're interested in geopolitics and that they've written about China, but Professor Yen and Professor Jones have both co-authored a book with Daniel A. Bell, a professor at Hong Kong University. And actually, I believe it's your latest book, Professor Yen, published in 2023, Bridging Two Worlds. And it's with 4 authors, and one of which is Daniel Bell and Professor Yen. And David, in 1995, published the book Towards a Liberal Democracy, together with four authors, of which he was one of the 4 authors, and Daniel Bell. And it was the work that coined the phrase a liberal democracy. And at the time, it was referring to Singapore, and it was meant in a more ambivalent or positive. It has a more positive or ambivalent connotation. And later, that term became associated with, especially in the critical discourse on Hungary, became associated with countries like Hungary. So now in the press, the critics of Hungary of the Hungarian government will write that it's a liberal democracy. And they don't know that they're using David's phrase from the mid-90s to describe the Singaporean model. So this is how things morph. But now we're going to listen to a lecture about globalization and deglobalization by Professor Yen. Please give a warm round of applause for Professor Yen.
First, I think I should express my great gratefulness and to the Danak Institute for arranging all these activities in Budapest, and I'm really very grateful to this. And today, and I'm also very happy to have this chance to share my view about international relations with all of the distinguished guests here. And we, through the discuss about what title will be interesting to our audience, we'll discuss about counter-globalization and China's foreign policy. And obviously, we will focus on 2 things, but these 2 things are related with each other. And why we talk the counter-globalization is because everyone talking about the world has changed. And everyone talking about, hey, the world changed. So then we want to know where the world is moving towards. That's why we're talking about the global order. And second, talking about foreign policy, like people say, hey, how China is going to do to shape the coming global order. I think in my trip to Europe this time, I heard a lot of questions relate to this. So I will spend 30 minutes on these 2 issues. And actually, when we're talking about this global order or China's foreign policy, we have to discuss how China adopted foreign policy according to the background or the age or the time, the trend of a global order. And nowadays, and I think there's a debate about whether we will return back to the Cold War. Many people believe we will turn back to the Cold War. When we ask them why, they always say, okay, because the Cold War is a bipolarity. Now, at that time, it's between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. But today, we have the competition between China and the U.S. So this major powers competition shape the current international power structure. So they say it's the same. And so my question is that can we define the global order according to power structure or not? That means if there's a multipolar system or multipolar configuration, can we avoid the Cold War? Or we also can have the Cold War with the background or based on multipolar polarity. So this is a very serious issue. China must considering and where's my status and what the competition, the core of the competition is, and how the other countries and play the role in shaping the global order. That's personally, I think the Cold War is a term to describe the specific competition between major powers in the history. It's not a special type of competition between the major powers. So here, let's think about why we never use the term Cold War to describe the period between World War I and World War II. Why? Because that is not the Cold War. Why we do not use the term Cold War to describe the period before World War I? There's 100 years peace before World War I. Why we do not regard that as a Cold War? The major powers still compete each other. So my understanding, because Cold War mainly refers to the competition between major powers for ideological expansion. For 1,000 years, major powers compete for power. But each time, the dynamic behind the competition are different. They may compete for land, for natural resources, and for wealth, and for global influence. But then during the Cold War, they compete for what? For ideological expansion, means to turn the other countries into the same political system or ideology as the great power itself. And through this competition, they believe if I can make a more country and adopt my political system, I can win the competition, right? So that is the Cold War. So now China must consider whether if this is a bipolarity and China is one of the pole, is one of the important competitor, do we compete with U.S. for ideological expansion? Do the ideological expansion can help China to win the competition? That's my view. I don't so. I don't think any side can win the competition by expanding ideology. The reason is very simple, because now is a digital age. In the digital age, the ideology is not an instrument to help you to pick up your integration in technology. If you cannot develop a more advanced digital technology, you cannot win the competition. Proxy war is useful for ideological expansion because you can use the war, change the regime in the country, and turn it into a system similar to yours. But today, you can change that country's regime. It doesn't mean that meanwhile you will have a more advanced technology over your rivals. You can occupy the land, but it doesn't mean that you can generate more wealth, and you can make your technology making progress faster than the other side. So the proxy war is already out of date. It won't help any major power to stronger. So what's the current character of the global order today? And Cold War is before the globalization. So that is a historical period, not globalized history. And so we have the globalization after 1991, and then now we move into a new age. It's called the counter-globalization. Why? Because it's after globalization. You cannot have a counter-globalization before globalization happened. So Cold War is not represented by the counter-globalization, but today the order is represented by the main feature of the counter-globalization. How we define this character, the counter-globalization? Globalization composes two parts: democratization and marketization, right? Okay. In terms of marketization, it doesn't mean that you marketize your economy at home. It means that you join the global market. You join the global marketized economy. So after the Cold War, you find that the economic cooperation among the major powers and through the international cooperation increased dramatically. It accumulated the wealth very faster, much faster than before. The 20 years, human being accumulated wealth more than what we do in the 100 years before that. And in the political aspect, globalization refers to what? Based on the norm of the sovereignty norm actually established after World War II, and based on the UN Charter. After Cold War, we strengthened or improved the norms of human rights. International community gradually accepted this concept that human rights should be protected, so-called the R2P, the government responsibility to protect the individual's life, security. So now the government no longer have a responsibility for protect the national security. And also what? They have the responsibility to protect the individual's security, the individual of their own people, their citizens. So now we find that the Cold War is the post-Cold War period is titled as a labor order. It's because there's two basic norms, and mainly, and the two basic norms. First is a free market economy, free trade, free investment, right, and the lower customer and on the trade, and politically and based on norm of the human rights, protect the human rights. Okay, look at the current situation. First, the principle of free market has been dramatically undermined by the decoupling policy. What do I mean decoupling? Decoupling that reduce international cooperation with given countries, right? Actually, someone may believe it's the U.S. started the initial trade war against China in 2008. Actually, that's not true. The starter is not U.S., it's UK. UK withdraw from where? From the EU. Reduce economic interdependence with the EU. Now, after the war takes place in Ukraine in 2022, and the EU feel the importance to protect its so-called economic security. They feel this is dangerous to rely on, to have too much economic interdependence with the rest of the world. So they develop a concept of de-risking. Actually, de-risking is generated or developed from the Americans' policy decoupling. And the decoupling means that they will segment the global market. There are no more free trade. The principle of free trade and diminish. When I said that stop diminish of the free trade principle, it doesn't mean that there's no more free trade for a region, for some country. I mean, at the global level, there's no more. And in political perspective, you find that human rights no longer respected as much as 1990s and first 10 years of this century. The typical case is in Gaza. The war in Gaza, when the civilians, children, and women are killed by the Israeli troops. So how these policymakers in Washington and in the European capitals do? They do not show any sympathy for the life of these people. They never concern, hey, the kids and the women's life, the Palestinian kids' life, are equal to Israel's people's life. They repeatedly emphasize, hey, thousands of Israeli civilians are killed by the Hamas. That's true. That's terrible. This is not acceptable. That's a violation of human rights. Then what? There's 1,000. How about this other side? Over 30,000. And I heard, and many, or not many, some people, they said that why Israel troops have to do that? Because Hamas used civilians as a human shield, right? Because this use these civilians as a human shield, so Israeli troops has no other choice. That's also not only Israeli government, but also White House spokesman. They argued in that way. The question is that, do you think we should kill the human shields for the sake of kill criminals? This human rights principle adopted by the directors of the Hollywood. Watch their movie. In their movie, whenever these criminals rob the bank and use the bank staff and the customers as a human shield, what's the police approach or strategy or methods are legal to attack or arrest or kill the criminals? Are they allowed to kill this human shield for the sake of to kill these criminals? Well, this is regarded as a violation of human rights. That's why the UN passed the agreements, not by individual members. Actually, this is initiated by the US and some European government. All governments have a responsibility to not only protect their own civilians, people, they also have the responsibility protect the civilian people's life in other countries. Now, have we heard this voice? Why police cannot kill the criminals and by through killing the human shield? It's because the human rights norms has accepted by majority of the world. And so now we find that the globalization and stopped not only in terms of the economic field, and the global governance and stopped not only in terms of dealing climate change, but also it has stopped in advancing or the pull forward, consolidating the norms of human rights. This is the situation. I do not want to make any value judgment. I just say that's what happened. The question is that how can we deal with this change? We would like to see this going forward, or we want to converse it, or we want to stop it. It's not easy. And the historical trend is sometimes very strong, and the human beings are not able to stop it. But even that, should we follow this trend and push forward, push the trend, or we should do something and slow this trend. So the other factor and create this background for China considering its foreign policy is a digital age. The age change means that the relations for, not relations, I mean the wealth, human beings' wealth, and the human beings' security has related to something we never experienced. The important thing that the wealth, more and more wealth, generated from where? From the cyberspace. How about the life and our security, both national security, individual security, and more and more related to what? To the cybersecurity. Digital economy accounts a larger share or increasing share of the GDP, not only in one country, globally. And how about the digital technology? Make the cybersecurity becomes an important part, possibly at least equal important to what? To the security in the natural space, right? So this is all of this based on what? Based on progress of digital technology. Okay, let me summarize this page. That means China understands that, and if we want to keep our economy growing fast enough, or if we want to make our economy better than the other countries, what do we have to do? We have to focus on develop digital economy. Digital economy has increased or growth rate is 1.5 times of the global GDP. So that means the larger share of your digital economy, you accumulate wealth faster. US, the same. Germany and the Japan, and also Hungary here. If you make your digital economy developed, that means you will become richer faster than before. Faster than those countries cannot have their digital economy developed normally. Meanwhile, if you have advanced digital technology, you can protect your cybersecurity. If you don't have that kind of technology, you cannot protect yourself. So in this case, China's foreign policy definitely will consider how we compete with the US in terms of what? Technology innovation, right? This is a concern. Okay, so now we show that in regarding the current international configuration, obviously, US has an advantage over China. Look at that. In terms of the strategic relations, the US have more allies, strategic partners than China. China have some, but not as many as the US. Because what? Because China adopted the non-alignment principle, while US heavily rely on the making military alliance. That's very obvious. But if you look at this, the pie, and the GDP, you find that US account for 24%, and China account for 17%. The other major powers and cannot count for one-fourth of China's, or 1/8. No, 1/5 of the United States, right? Less than that, 1/5. So what does that mean? It means in the next decade, in 10 years, China and the US will simultaneously enlarge the gap with the other powers. And meanwhile, it's possible, and the U.S. also enlarged the power gap with China. And also possible, if China adopt the right strategy, we narrow the gap with the United States. This is uncertain. It's not clear. But one thing is clear. Both China and the U.S. will enlarge their economic gap with the other powers. U.S. increased by 1%, how about the other countries? And the other countries only less than 1/5 of the U.S. That means they have to increase by 5%. U.S. increased by 2%, the other countries will have to increase 10%. Otherwise, the gap just enlarged. So my personal prediction, the bipolar configuration will be strengthened rather than weakened. Okay, is that good news for China or bad news? China said, wait a minute. I really want to hide myself behind someone. But then China said, who I can use as a human shield before me? No one. You cannot find the shield before you. So China must face the fact, and U.S. will take China as a major rivalry. It won't change. No matter who elected as the president in the next 10 years. So someone think, okay, I always face the question, hey, which president do you like, Biden or the Trump? For me, I say, no matter who, they won't change. They will regard China as the major rivalry and no change in the next decade. So we have to face this reality, okay? And we have to face the reality. U.S. has more allies, we have less. We're not in advantage over this strategic situation or the balance of power. We're in disadvantage. We have to deal with this. Okay. Related to this, if the world continue moving forward in a positive direction, the world becomes more respect to human rights, becomes more respect for human's morality, and becomes more interest to enlarge cooperation. Well, for China, this is relatively easier. Unfortunately, the history didn't move forward. The history has to make a U-turn. The history is making retrogression. You all know that. My government uses a word. It's called a centenary change. What means centenary change? It means this change is so huge and also very negative to China's modernization, to China's development, to China's national rejuvenation. Look at this is our history. And in last 120 years, technology from telegraph to 5G is a linear development, right? No retrogress. The industry, from traditional industry and the labor-intensive, capital-intensive, technology-intensive, knowledge-intensive, now come to data-intensive. So this is also linear development. How about our political relations? How about the politics? Before World War I, we have 100 years of peace. And then we have World War I. And the war killing people over 10,000, right? And then we have 22 years of peace. Then we have World War II. We have even more people. And millions and millions of the people killed during the World War II. And we're going by. And then we have Cold War. Cold War is not good, but it's a kind of a progress than World War I and World War II. there's still millions of people killed, but not not hundreds of millions of people killed. And Cold War, there's a proxy war, no major war, no global war. And then we find that during the Cold War, the people killed less in the war than World War I and World War II. Then the human being make another progress post-Cold War. And each war killed less and less people, especially civilians. Right? And look at the war in the Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. The scale of the deaths of the civilian people cannot compare with the war in Korea, in Vietnam, and in Middle East, in the 6 wars. So, how about now? The casualty of the civilians in the war increased. And people, according to the quantitative calculation, the war in Gaza and got more than 30,000 people killed within 3 months. This, the scale of the deaths created a historical record from the post-Cold War period. So you can say, okay, I would defend the history not by the death of the life, by something else. If I define the history according to the industry, according to the technology, the world making progress. You can see that. But then if you look at the reality, if we really regarded the life is the most important, is the most valuable to our human being, that's my view, that's my way, to use the death of the casualty of the life as an indicator to measure the history. It's moving forward progressively or step back toward the backward. Yeah. So for China, we must understand the world is not continue to making progress, but make a U-turn toward this negative, a bad direction. So personally, I would say this trend, I call it counter-globalization. Okay. It won't work. Sorry. Okay. Let me see. Maybe we will have chat. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to another. Okay, I try to finish within the 9 minutes.
We have enough time, really.
Really? Okay. If you allow me to say more. Now, in this age, and because it's a digital age, and China must concern, and how can we have to adopt or making making foreign policy according to the specialty of the time. This is the mechanism for digital economy. Digital economy is very, very different from the economy we're familiar. The wealth of the digital economy based on data. Based on data. Data is not a natural resources. Data is artificial resources. It's made up by human beings, by ourselves, right? Okay. It's so different from natural sources, no matter gas, coal, anything in natural resources. And theoretically speaking, the more you use, the less left. Even talking about the solar energy, they said someday the sun is going to die, right? Okay. Data, totally opposite. The more you use, the more you have. This is unlimited resources. The more you consume, and then there's more data, right? You take taxi, there's a data, and the taxi drivers use the data to find you and to pick you up, and you take that, then there's another data. The data is growing very fast. Every lady purchasing anything at the shop, then you just make the data resources bigger. By doing what? By doing nothing, just by buying something. The more you buy, and the more data. Okay, then what happened? The data cannot be generated wealth by itself. You need a digital technology. The digital technology will collect the data. Without technology, you cannot collect the data, the whole world. When you collect them, you still don't know how to use them. You have to process. Process means you categorize them. After categorize, they still are not usable. And how can you make use? You need analysis, the so-called data analysis. That becomes a discipline for the university. Students attend courses and specialize on data analysis. That becomes a kind of job, just like nurse. So after this through process, this data becomes usable, but still not wealth. Then you need a technology to marketize this data. You sell the data. You use the data to produce products and service, and then consume them again. And after consumption, and it becomes wealth, and simultaneously enlarge the resources of the data. And that's why the economy grows faster and faster. Okay, why I want to talking about details? I just want to let you know, if China cannot make this circle faster and successful in China, what I mean? China cannot compete with the US. In the coming decade, the economic competition focus on digital technology. Digital technologies, the capability of digital technology means how fast you can integrate your technology and to generate wealth, right? Okay, now we move to this part. This part tells us even important. And in the last 2 years, very, very recently, ChatGPT very soon, ChatGPT just becomes known and used for 1 year and replaced by Sora. Okay, people shocked. Because it means what? It means human beings started use AI to generate wealth. Human beings start to use AI to do what? To protect their security. No, it's used, the AI machines, AI weapons already used on the battleground. And so here, they tell you, one individual person, your brain and combined with 3 robots and 16 AI. And one person can produce the products like one factory, just one individual. You can imagine how powerful it is. And if China do not compete with the US on these issues, but focus on the ideology, and that means that we will hurt ourselves, we undermine ourselves. That's why China said that we have no interest in ideological confrontation with you. No matter what you say, no matter what US you do, we have no interest to participate in this kind of ideological confrontation. Okay. So, how about the US? May I have some water?
Oh, yes.
So, how about the US? US policy towards China is already determined or decided. by their knowledge about the world. And they will contain China, but this is not a comprehensive containment like what they do to Soviet Union. They contain Soviet Union in all fields, and technology, education, culture, military, economy, and even try to contain the Soviet Union in the sports. But this time, U.S. said no. U.S. do not want to contain China comprehensively. It's not because the U.S. becomes more benign. It's because it's unnecessary, and because the U.S. still needs China's market consumption capability. Why? And the reason is that, so they said, since the competition with China is focused on technology, we only contain China's technology progress, contain China's technology invention. What's the name of the strategy? Do any of you know that? They're frequently repeated by the Blinken. Small yard and high fence, right? Small yard means, okay, we establish a club, exclude China from joining us. We are few countries, we establish a technology club and work together and develop our technology standard and exclude China from it. And like China cannot invent technology as faster as us. That is a very clear strategy. That's why Yellen came to China, told the Chinese government that U.S. has no intention to decouple China in terms of the economy. Actually, that's only 50% true. What? Do not decouple China's consumption market. They said, we still need to sell the products to you. We need your money to purchase our products, including the digital products. Americans produce a lot of chips. They say, hey, who is going to purchase chips? They say, Chinese is the largest consumer buying American chips. I doubt any country buying more chips from the U.S. than China. No country. Why they want to sell the chips to China? The chips side to China will help China to improve this digital economy. Why? Because the modern technology decided, or the digital technology already decided, you need a fast integration in technology field. How can you make it? And you need to continuously invest in this R&D. Where you get the money? You have to sell your products to get a benefit, and then put the benefit into the R&D, and then create new products, and then to get benefit, and then to invest again. This is the competition. That's why, that's my understanding, U.S. even adopted the containment strategy against China. U.S. do not want to have that relationship with China like what it had with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So this bipolarity is different from the bipolarity we're familiar during the Cold War. It's different. Okay. And when U.S. defend China as a major competitor, and the containment principle already becomes impossible to change. And so they just decoupling partially from China, and then at a multilateral level, they develop this small yard high fence. I want to say this is, I want to clarify this. This is very important. Biden administration no longer use the term globalization in official documents. Can any of you give me evidence? Show? No. U.S. government still advance or advocate for globalization? No more. American government, no matter Biden or Trump, they think globalization is in favor of China, not in favor of the U.S. That is what this is said not by me, by Trump himself, right? He said, hey, if globalization is right, globalization is initiated by the U.S., He said, if you're right, he attacked the liberalist elites. So if you're right, if your idea for globalization is right, why China benefit more than us? Is right strategy or wrong strategy? So Biden clearly said, I abandoned the globalization. Biden tried to change this quietly, secretly, but actually the same. What a term they use to replace globalization. They use internalization instead of globalization. Because as long as he has three countries work together, they can call it internationalization. Right? Not bipolar, multipolar, so that's internationalization. So US is already, my understanding, officially abandoned globalization. US abandoned that. You cannot stop counter-globalization. Because America adopted deglobalization policy. So that's no doubt why US adopted as a protectionism in economy and abandoned human rights norms. And the last thing is ideology strategy. US, some people say, wait a minute. The main problem in China and the US is ideology. Because your authoritarian regime, not our democracy, right? Look at that. All of the countries that follow the US are democratic countries. Is that true? Do we believe that? Did you see that? All Americans partners are Western democracy. How about Vietnam? How about Saudi Arabia? So for the US, the ideology is just an instrument. When he can use this ideology to monopolize support against China, he said, that's good. But when this ideology is an obstacle to Americans' strategy, he said, forget it. Don't tell me democracy in Gaza. Don't tell me the human rights in Gaza. That's nonsense. Right? So now you see that. So now you find that ideology is no longer the U.S. have no intention to expand the ideology globally, not like the Cold War. And China have no interest in to expand its ideology. And also, from my understanding, we know where our political system is so unique. We call it a political system with the Chinese characteristics, right? You all know that. 中国特色. Well, and we heavily emphasize that our success is based on the rule of the leadership of a Chinese Communist Party. Can we have any country based on their rules and the success of a Chinese Communist Party? Can you have the Chinese Communist Party in Vietnam? Or can you have the Chinese Communist Party in Cuba? No way. You have communists, but that's Cuba communists. Social, the American communists, Japanese communists, or Vietnam communists. You can never have a Chinese Communist Party rule any country beyond China. Without a base, how can you make this country follow China's model to create the development with the Chinese characteristic? That's impossible. So we have no interest in ideological confrontation. So now I said that the U.S. instrumentally use ideology to do that. Finally, I say, what's the Chinese strategy to go? And I have low, middle, high. Low means that possible. Right? It's quite possible. China's strategy, foreign strategy, avoid a coding war. Avoid a Cold War. We think the Cold War is in favor of the United States. Cold War is not in favor of China. So we strongly criticize the Cold War mentality, 冷战思维, right? And so we said we do not fight a Cold War. We want to work with the U.S. since the Biden administration officially said that they do not want to fight a Cold War. Okay, let's work together, prevent a Cold War. What it means? Concretely, no proxy war between us. Not only no direct war, even proxy war. We should prevent the proxy war between us. Okay, there's a very recent article in the Foreign Affairs call on the U.S. to initiate a Cold War against China, right? Publicly. Why? The logic is very simple. These people say, we win the Cold War last time. If we establish a new Cold War with China, we can win again. We have experience to win the Cold War, but China don't have. That's their argument. You read that article in Foreign Affairs last week. Okay. So the lowest, I think it's possible. As long as China avoids ideological competition with the U.S., we can prevent the proxy war between China and the U.S. The middle, this is possible, but there are some more difficulties. To prevent the power gap from being enlarged. And there's no war between China and the U.S., but how can we narrow the gap, power gap, not only GDP, but also technology, but also military, culture, and in all fields? It's not easy. We possibly can narrow the power gap in some fields, but if you narrow the gap with this comprehensively in all fields, that's really need a very, very successful achievement. So that's but still possible. The highest is what? Shaping a favorable geopolitical environment for China. And this is not easy. The global power is not shaped by one country. And only in the unipolar condition. And the U.S. has that capability to shape the global power and based on the status as the only superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But now, China do not have that kind of status, do not have that kind of material capability, so it's very difficult. And some people concerned, and Asian Pacific, and maybe China should shape the order for Asian Pacific before shape the global order. Well, even shape the Asian Pacific order, not that easy. America have so many allies in this region. How can you make this country agree with China's idea to set up rules to establish a new order? Okay, I'm 100% sure someone have a question in your mind that, hey, you have a debate, you have problem with the Americans' idea about the new global order. America has already said they want to establish an order based on rules, the order based on rules, right? And China, you do not respect the rules. Well, that's not true. China frequently asked the American counterparts, we said, okay, without the rules, there's no order. That's a human society. Without rules, can you have order? Without rules, how about the traffic? No matter where, in class, in hospital, in military, anywhere, without rules, there's no order. Order must be based on rules. The question or the problem between China and U.S. is, what rules? Can you tell me what the rules? University rules, hospital rules, military rules, prison rules, what rules? And we get a response from the U.S. is like, you know. We say, what it is? They say, you know. U.S. do not want to defend clearly what rules should be based on, because Americans just pick up the rules and which can legitimize their behavior. So you look at that, when China said, hey, should we based on the rules of the UN? U.S. tell us, depends. Depends on which issue, right? The war in Ukraine, definitely, we should based on rules of the UN. And the Gaza, no, UN has the rules of the UN irrelevant with Gaza. So you see, and the U.S. do not have concrete rules for the order of based on rules. Now, what China can do, I think if China can work with the rest of countries, except the US, to discuss what common rules we should establish for the global order, and possibly we can play a role to shape a favorable order for China. I think that's very difficult. I doubt our American allies will support China. Some of them may, but most of them may not, right? And finally, okay, this is really final, very, very final. And here I want to summarize and the differences between Cold War order and post-Cold War order and current order, or the coming order. And global order composed three elements: values, norms, and power distributions. During the Cold War, the values refer to the competition between capitalism and the communism. And after the Cold War, American liberalism dominated the world value. That's why we have labor order. We have free market economy. We have the human rights norms. And now, the liberalism no longer the dominating value in the world. Liberalism is decline. But decline of liberalism is not because of capitalism or because of communism, not because socialism or the other anything. It's because of the rising of populism. Populism is not grown up in non-Western countries. Populism beginning momentum first in Western democracy. So now the liberalism faces the main challenger not at the international level, but where? At home, at the domestic level. When those countries initiated liberalism and face a problem at home, and liberalism is no longer popular at home, how can they advance the liberalism at the international level? That's impossible. So, because of the change in values, the norms also change. During the Cold War, sovereignty norms is a major norms that govern nation states. It doesn't mean make everyone adhere to these norms. It means that at that time, sovereignty is the most convincing norms, and for all the countries debate whether their behavior is inconsistent with the norm of the sovereignty because it's based on the UN Charter. And after the post-Cold War, the human rights becomes more influential over the sovereignty. How about now? Both the sovereignty and the human rights, what the two norms undermined, have a less and less impact to govern the country's behavior. And so the power distribution, everyone knows, during the Cold War, it's a competition between the Soviet Union and the US, and then US dominated the global leadership. Now, we have the decentralization, Americans' domination, but have not made this equal power division between China and the US. China still, there's a big gap between with the US. So finally, I think I want to jump over this and just talk this. How the world make a U-turn from globalization to counter-globalization. This is a puzzle for all of our academic people and try to understand. Hey, the world moving forward in the positive direction, who steered the car and make a U-turn to the counter-globalization? My understanding, the globalization actually created a polarization at both international and domestic level. Internationally, you can see, and the G20 once claimed it accounts for 85% of the GDP. Wait a minute. G20 only have 40-some countries. How about the other 150 countries? They only have share 15%. 150 countries only share 15%. So these countries never be happy with the globalization. And domestic level, look at all of these advanced countries. The gap between the rich and the middle class, I'm not talking about the poor people, the wealth gap between the rich and the middle class enlarged dramatically during this period of globalization. So middle class is unhappy. When middle class are unhappy, poor class are unhappy, and the poor countries are unhappy, then what? The populism becomes popular. Because populism against the elite. What kind of elite? Liberalist elite. Because the liberal elites advance the globalization. And then the rise of populism created a chance for populist leaders to hold the power. And then they develop concept economic security. For protect their economic security, what's the best way to protect the economic security? How do you protect the people who worry about losing his job? What's the best way? There's no foreign investment, no foreigner in this country. So you never face the danger by have your job taken away by foreigners. So that's why there's an anti-immigrant feeling, and the fear is growing. So personally, I think the concept is very, very unhealthy. In some ways, very negative, economic security. Because there's no definition, no scope, no boundary, no one knows what it is. But policymakers can always use this concept to legitimize any policy, reduce international cooperation. Why? They said, for the sake of the economic security. So you can find that some country isolated from the world, have no foreign trade with any countries. They never fear. They never fear for interdependence. Why? There's no dependence. They depend on nobody, right? We have a neighbor. They don't have a foreign trade with any country. So here you can see, and then for the sake of economic security, they adopt a deglobalization policy. When all major powers mutually imitate each other, then counter-globalization becomes the trend. And at last, I will say, okay. At last, I will say, now we are in a very unhealthy age. The world is not moving forward. And every country, every individual should, if we cannot do anything, but we have to think about it. What is the right thing to do? At least we should not support this counter-globalization behavior. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So this is quite exciting. We covered a lot of ground. It's also interesting. There were a lot of final slides, but they were very. This was excellent. Victor, you have some points of commentary, some questions. Please go ahead.
I have to, because that's my job. So, good evening, everyone. And first of all, I have to express my gratitude to being here because 10 years ago, I studied at Tsinghua University, and Professor Yan was my teacher, and I helped a lot. He helped me a lot in my research. So, this really have a special meaning for me to being here today. Despite, of course, I'm a big fan of Professor Yan. I can promise that I will be critical tonight. So in my comment, I try to be quite short to provide also some time for questions and discussions. I will focus on three major points because the aim of your presentation was to to show us what is the Chinese strategy is changing international system. And when we're talking about strategy, there is always 3 points that we have to put on the table. First, what is happening outside the world. Second, how do we identify our goals in these changing international circumstances? And last but not least, how can we achieve these goals? So what is the direct policy? So my 3 points will touch these issues. So first, I fully agree with you that we are now in a transitional period because the liberal international system is collapsed. It is collapsed, I think, because the power relations behind it dramatically changed. So the quasi-US dominance or quasi-hegemony of the United States collapsed, and which had an impact for the international system, which created a kind of a break in the rules, which had an impact on all the countries, or great powers and all the countries' behavior, that when we don't really know the norms and values and we don't really have the concrete rules of the game, we try to seek and maximize very much our own interest and try to identify our interest in these changing circumstances. So, and in this case, of course, the key question is, what are the key trends? And I also agree that one of the key trends is that we have to face a great power competition. So as also you identify, it's kind of a new Cold War. The second is still that we have the globalization, and there's a tendency of anti-globalization due to the great power competition. And maybe there is also a kind of a new digital age, which can be identified as a major trend. My question is that, do we need to give a hierarchy for these trends? Because in my understanding, all the states who are seeking security but prosperity at the same time, doing a kind of a decision within this interval to focus more on the business profits or focusing more on security. And this will reflect me, or this will guide me to my second point. I would like to underline that if I understand well the situation in China, if China does this hierarchy, China prioritizes prosperity, therefore wants to maintain and keep globalization. But my question is that, and you also highlighted this issue, that we have to face the reality. Is China really facing the reality when giving a priority to maintaining globalization, focusing on prosperity, especially in the light of the strategy of the United States you also identified? So when we see that from the American point of view, the more focus is on security, and therefore to stop the further rise of China or try to encircle somehow China or stop the digital rise of China. Is this a relevant goal for China to keep the prosperity in the focus and have the rejuvenation of the nation? And my last, of course, is reflecting to the strategy. And you highlighted these 3 points in your strategy. Do you think that you can achieve these 3 points with using this strategy if the others not playing the game as you? So do we like, of course, we want all new rules of the game. But is it reality? So thanks.
Well, Victor is always very clever. When he criticizes me, always keep the point and very sharp. And you're absolutely right when I'm talking about the foreign strategy composed 2 parts, the goals and the approach to achieve the goals. So he found that, hey, Yan is so canny, he avoid talking about the approaches and only talking the goals, right? Well, I think you're right. And to have the goals doesn't mean anything if you don't have the concrete approach to achieve them. And first, I will say, China, like you said, China, we admit it. We benefit from the globalization more than any country in the world. Otherwise, we cannot reduce the power gap with the US in the last 20 years, right? And after we joined the WTO, and then China gradually reduced the power gap with the United States. We admitted that we benefit from globalization. So there's no reason for China take a policy oppose the globalization. So, but how can you resume the globalization since globalization has already stopped? From my understanding, and China think there's no other choice, the only one approach, and already initiated or set up, designed by Deng Xiaoping, opening up. Now, open up and the opening up is different. Opening up is especially refers to the policy after 1978. In Chinese, when you're talking the opening policy, it refers to the Qing dynasty when the foreign powers forced China open the gate. So opening up means China willingly and self-initiatively open itself to the rest of the world. So opening up for what? Actually, for myself, for more international cooperation. I think you all know that. And recently, we have the China Development Forum. And then after the meeting, our leader meet with the entrepreneurs, the global entrepreneurs, and talking about ensure them China will open the door as wider as possible to foreign capitals. And meanwhile, China said, we wish the other countries also open your market to Chinese investment. So for China, we think only we can increase the mutual investment, then it's possible to resume globalization. If we cannot resume or increase the mutual investment, it's no way. And regarding to the Europe, I think China really value the European market, just like we value the ASEAN's market, Japanese market, US market, and the European market. Why? Because this market has the capability to consume digital products, right? The Africa, Latin America, they don't have that kind of consumption capability. So China thinks we should resume or increase economic relationship with Europe. And so now just have the France president and the Germany's concert to visit China, and possibly, and we will have some mutual visit. And when we open the country, there's a big problem. Is what? How can we stabilize the opening up policy? Is what? How to maintain the balance between the security and development? Which one should I give the first priority? Security or development? From my understanding, China believes the security issue mainly, or the security threat mainly from the US, not the other countries. And so what do we need? We need to manage the competition between China and the US. So the manage differences and the competition between China and US is very, very important. And if we cannot manage this competition, let the competition drift away, escalating into war, that means that's a disaster. So from my understanding, the opening up policy is based on managing the security relationship with the United States. So when you ask me which one enjoyed the first priority, I would say in terms of military security, definitely security enjoyed the first priority. But in generally speaking, the grand strategy for the modernization, for the development, for the achieving the goal of the national rejuvenation, the development will have the first priority. So recently, if you read the Chinese official document, you can find they stress more about development.
Professor Yen, you spoke about opening up. I have a question about the concept reform and opening up, because both in English and in Chinese, they form a pair. So you have the opening up was the opening of China towards the outside world, and the reform part was the changing China, how China was domestically organized. So when Deng Xiaoping initiated reform and opening up in 1978, it had both an external and an internal component. In order to be able to effectively open up to the outside world, you had to reform a few things in China, which at that time was still Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist in a more classical way. So now, aren't we in the same situation that opening up for China would also need internal development? Yeah, and I have read some interpretations of Xi Jinping fought for socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era. It's the official party doctrine right now, and these interpretations say that Xi Jinping thought puts more focus on party-centered patriotism and national unity, and de-emphasizes reform in the Dengist way. Would you agree with those interpretations, or have reform and opening, are they more separate now than they used to be? Do they have a different relationship? What does reform look like in this regard?
Well, I think the question is very, very professional. Only the China watchers know the relationship between reform and opening up. Opening up refers to the foreign policy toward the outside. The reform refers to the domestic policy. So Deng Xiaoping actually started with this term reform and opening up, right? So currently, and I think people understand that, reform is very necessary because without reform, there's no basic condition for opening up the country. You have to reform a lot of political systems, regulations, because these regulations are obstacle for opening up this country, right? So they need to. Nowadays, I think this reform and refer to one thing is different from before. They use the term high quality opening up. So the reform is no longer talking about how to change the original domestic regulations, but also the reform have to keep the balance. The reform will make the opening up in the high quality, not the low quality. Well, people say, what the difference between high quality and low quality? For instance, when we open up the country and we import a lot of garbages from the foreign countries, and resulted in big pollution, right? So this kind of, certainly the companies are also making money from the import of the garbage. But now this kind of business are forbidden.
Literal garbage, I thought you meant metaphorical. Literal garbage.
Literal garbage. Okay. Because for like the old clothes and the electric garbage, and then they can get these metals and something, and they also can make profits. But now this kind of opening up regarded as a low quality opening up. So they use the term high quality opening up. That means, well, reform, but the reform cannot, you open the country, have this kind of, backward business come to China, and like that. So I think now these things are still under the research and study and the 摸索阶段, touching water period, and to find out the right way. And I don't think there's already reached a common, concrete agreements. Yeah.
Can I have a question connected to this? So, according to my understanding, reform and opening up went hand in hand. And now we are facing to a new era when the external circumstance is changing. What happens if you are not able to continue the opening up? What kind of reform does it impact in China? And do you have a strategic plan for this situation?
I should say, actually, the reopening up policy started from last year. because during the pandemic period, actually we keep the pandemic control longer than the rest of the world until the very end, the December of the 2022. So we restarted the opening up policy, generally speaking, from the spring after the Spring Festival in February of the 2023. Now it's only 1 year and 2 months, right? And the first meeting, the China Development Forum, and held in the March of the last year, and this is a second conference. I think this is still just started. And by now, and my understanding, and the government realized that we need to open even wider and create a better environment for foreign investment. And we heard that there's some complaint, and because there's some policy adopted during the pandemic period, and still are obstacle to the foreign investment. And now they're still trying to pace up to get rid of all these unnecessary constraints. And I'm not an economist, I'm not an expert on China's economy. I don't know the details about the policy. But one thing is clear. I think the central government understands the situation. And for instance, now we have a very poor tourist business in China. And because of this WeChat Pay make the foreign tourists very difficult to travel in China. And most shops do not accept cash. And credit card, the credit card do not work. And yesterday we went to Germany. I don't know why. Our credit card doesn't work there. But I'm happy they work at a hotel here. And so this kind of thing becomes a real obstacle. You know, as soon as you land on China, you find that, hey, you don't know how to pay all of this service. So I think now the government has already called on the financial center, the bank, hey, reform your system and make it easier for foreign tourists to pay for the service. And this is, I think this is just one small thing. There's many, many things like this.
No, that's absolutely right. If you go to China now, already when, since 2015, almost all payments went digitally. People pay with their phones and have been doing so for almost a decade. So it's quite problematic if you go there and you don't have access to these financial services. But indeed, it has recently, I heard, been taken care of. So now you can.
I think you really should be very careful with that. Don't be embarrassed. When you get off, you suddenly find no matter how much cash you have, you cannot pay. No one accepts it.
So recently they fixed that, or they made it more accessible to foreigners to have these use these digital methods. And a lot of EU countries, including my own country, the Netherlands, I'm a Dutch person, and I think also Hungary, if I'm not mistaken, now have visa-free travel for quite an extensive period of time. So, but I don't know if us going there, Victor, would be high quality or low quality opening up from the Chinese point of view? High quality, okay, ambitious. Give it up for Victor and Professor Yen. Thank you very much.